How's it, Josh? So I've got an interesting debate around international management and the length of contracts for international managers for you today. But before we get into it, the trivia for today, can you tell me which European international manager served the longest time?
I'm thinking it was the France manager because he went to a lot of different tournaments. And is he still the French manager now? The French manager who won the last World Cup with them.
Didier Deschamps.
Is it Didier Deschamps? Yeah.
You're close. He's actually the fourth one. So the longest serving was Joachim Low. He was there from 2006. So he was there from 2006. He served about 15 years in international management, which is fairly impressive when you boil it down to any kind of management. But with international management specifically, when you're only active for so few months in a year, and specifically around like your international tournaments, the big tournaments, your World Cups and your Euros, a lot of your time is kind of spent almost scouting. So the question I have for you today is there a space for short-term international management contracts to take over during World Cups and Euros? So, for example, England could have carried on with an interim manager until the next World Cup where they got Pep Guardiola in for 3 months. Do you think there's a space for that?
I think there's an argument for both. I'm going to go with, so I'm not sitting on the fence here. My opinion is that there's no space for the short-term contracts. I will get out the way where I think you could have an argument for it quickly, and then I'll go back to why I don't think it's viable. I can clearly see going to a major tournament, whether that's a Euro, World Cup, or AFCON, depending what continent you're on, etc., to get a manager in who's got a winning record, so to speak, with big tournaments, a little Jose Mourinho or something like that, and trying to win the tournament quickly and get the silverware, and then agreement that he'll leave. Funny enough, France did that at the Olympics. They got Thierry Henry in literally for their Olympic team, and then he left immediately after the tournament. So there are examples of that. I just don't think it works, because when I think about international team, you're talking about there's the winning side, winning the individual matches, but it's also about developing like football in that country, bringing players through the youth system, developing a style of play that hopefully the under 21s and the under 18s are playing that way as well for your country, and a sort of a system that they can progress through the ranks. So when you keep chopping and changing the international manager, you keep breaking those systems as well as the backroom staff that come with that, etc. So in my opinion, when you're thinking medium to long term with international football, which is something you need to think about even more than club football, because you only have so few matches and tournaments in a 4-year cycle, it's in your interest to look that medium to long term rather than short term.
I kind of agree with you. I understand what you're saying about the medium to long term focus, but the one thing I will say is you got to think about players. Now, realistically, most players will go to 2 World Cups. If they're very good, they'll get 3, and in that time, they'll maybe get 2 or 3 Euro championships. And now, in terms of the short term contract, the thing that how I would see it working is realistically, like, you're not spending enough time with these players to actually coach them into a whole new system, or like do what a Pep Guardiola does at a Man City, and go in and kind of evolve that entire footballing club's culture to play the way that they're playing. So realistically, every single international manager has short-term goals. It's you're judged on your international tournaments. You're not judged on these period of international friendlies and Nations League, which is just friendlies. I'm sorry, it's a load of nonsense, that competition. But you're judged on your big competitions. You're judged on your European Championship, and you're judged on your World Cups. And for those tournaments, they don't see those players that they pick for a while before those tournaments. The last international break is March or something like that. It's that, and then the next game that you play with them is like a warm-up game for a World Cup, and you've had 2 or 3 weeks with the team before the World Cup. So I'm saying that you could very easily get a proper world-class caliber manager for your England job or your Germany job, and then he will have a background staff in the FA that understand his tactics and the way that he wants to play, and they'll focus on getting the under-20s and the under-19s, because I can't imagine that your top manager is focusing that much on how the under-20s and under-19s are playing. They're focused too much on trying to make sure they keep their job out of the World Cup, you know? So I think there's definitely, in my mind, there's definitely a scope for getting a world-class elite manager in for those short periods of time, because they'll only have 6 weeks in general to work with that squad that you've picked for the World Cup anyway. So what does it matter if that manager's been there for 3 years when his squad's probably slightly different from the last major tournament?
So two things. Firstly, if you're a really top player, you go to potentially 3 World Cups. Just something that's kind of amusing in that whole dynamic is it's like the worse your national team is, the more World Cups in a way you get to go to because there's less competition. But then your chances of actually doing something significant in the tournament are obviously lower because the team's worse. So you want this weird, as a player, you want this weird middle ground. You want a good enough team that they can compete in a World Cup or Euros, etc. But you also want it weak enough, at least in your position, so that you can go to as many World Cups and Euros as possible. I just thought that was a amusing situation to mention. Going back to the short-term, long-term manager thing, I disagree with you, because if you have a manager and the training is set up the same, the tactics are set up the same over a long duration, when it comes to the Euro and the World Cup period and the build-up to that, the players know how training is going to operate. They know how the tactics are going to operate. And roughly speaking, the squad is going to be very similar, because that manager will have his favorites in certain positions. And it gets international football at that point closer. You'll never get it all the way there, but it gets it closer to a club environment where the players know each other. They know how the team's meant to set up and play. They even know the kind of substitutes the manager likes to make, etc. So since you have less time together, you're almost utilizing the time you do have more efficiently. It's not they come for 6 weeks, they have to learn the whole new strategy of this manager, learn his training styles, learn, the manager's trying to learn who he wants to play and who he doesn't. So I think there's a huge advantage to having a long-term international manager for the players.
So I agree with you in terms of a long-term international manager, but what I'm saying is, how many managers realistically survive more than 3 tournaments? It doesn't happen very often. I mean, the longest-serving European international manager was 15 years, which, when you look at it, that's eight tournaments, and that's a long time, but it's still only 8 tournaments. Most international managers are probably lasting 5 years, 6 years, maybe 1 World Cup cycle kind of thing. So you're getting 2 to 3 tournaments out of them. So I get what you're saying. Those players who are picked for like that manager, I will understand his tactic. But what I'm not saying is that you get in a short-term manager every single tournament. What I'm saying is you break the contract out of tournament. So what will happen is for example, you get Pep Guardiola in for the World Cup for 6 weeks. And then at the end of the World Cup, he's gone. He goes and he does Manchester City again. And then you have his assistant will then take over during the Nations League and during all the like intermediate stuff. And then when the next tournament comes in, you go back to Guardiola and go, hey, 6-week contract, here you go. And so you still got the same manager coming through, but what you don't have is him sitting around for ages doing not too much. Yeah. And you also end up probably, because you're not going to go Pep Guardiola, to be honest. You're going to get someone else, because guys like Pep Guardiola won't want to do it. But you will get managers who will probably take less money than a full-time manager to do a 6-week job. And then they'll do that for the next 4 tournaments. And then you allow your FA to save a bit of money. You then give your England coaches who are actually actively English, you give them the chance to manage in between during the Nations League and get an experience of what it is like to be an FA manager, an international manager. And then when a big manager does come back in, they get to learn under the big manager. And during that time, they'll hopefully have learned how the big manager wants to play, and they will carry on implementing that through to the next tournament.
Now that you've explained it like that, I actually love the idea, which is so funny, because I said I disagreed earlier. And someone's definitely on their keyboard right now saying, oh, you hate the idea, now you love it. But now that I've heard you explain it like that, the part that I'm like that's actually brilliant as an idea, is let's carry on with Pep Guardiola as the example here, and let's use Spain as the nation then. He comes in for every Euro and World Cup for the 6-week contract, manages the team himself, and when he leaves that 6-week contract, he leaves an assistant manager he has chosen to continue training his style of play and telling him this is the players I want to play and whatever. And as you said, giving those Spanish coaches and the assistant manager practice as being an international manager for that nation. So developing Spanish coaches and staff, etc. during that period. And then he, with the knowledge, he will come back in as the manager for each major tournament, since no one really cares about the friendlies and the qualifiers and whatever. I actually think it's a really smart, great idea. What I thought you meant initially with the question was, you bring Pep Guardiola in for 6 weeks, and then after the tournament's done, you never hear or see from him again. And then at the next tournament, you go get Arteta in as the manager, and then you never hear from him for 6 weeks. I thought it was like this door for every Euro and every World Cup. But your version, where you get potentially the same manager just in for the tournament, and he has his coaching staff in there for that, call it off-season or out-of-tournament season, is a really great idea, I think, actually. Now that you said it, I'm very surprised we haven't seen that yet from any major nations.
I think that's the thing. I do think I probably didn't explain it very well initially, but using that revolving door thing would be very silly because you've got different tactics for different managers. If that was an option, there would definitely be FAs that would try and do it. Like your Italian FA, I can't imagine they wouldn't be interested in saving a bit of money on but managing to get a top class manager in. And there's also a part of me that goes, I can't imagine every manager would do it. I'm sure there'll be a lot of managers that will go, no, I want my break, I'm not interested. But I'm very sure there'll be a couple of, like Eddie Howe, for example, for England. If England decided that they wanted an English manager, that's what they want to do. And you go, Eddie Howe, and he goes, I'm really enjoying being at Newcastle. And then they come to him and go, right, well, what if we just got you in to do your tactics with an assistant manager? We get someone in who knows how you want to play. We do that. They take care of during the season internationals, and then you come in for the big tournaments. And I can't imagine a manager like Eddie Howe in that kind of band of managers. They're not world-class elite managers. They're very good managers. I can't imagine them turning down that many opportunities to win a World Cup, win a Euros. And they're better managers most of the time than the interim managers or even the managers like Gareth Southgate. I'm sorry, would not coach top 10 Premier League. I just don't think he does, at least not when he got the job. So I do think there's probably some merit to getting these kind of managers in.
Something I've picked up on, you just reminded me of this, is there's almost been a rise in profile of assistant managers in the Premier League. So, for example, Manchester United have had Steve McLaren as one of their assistant managers for a few seasons now under Ten Hag. And he was obviously, if I'm not mistaken, was he an ex-England manager? Or he certainly was a Premier League manager in the past, Steve McLaren. So that's actually a phenomenal example. Now, he doesn't need to be developed. We talk about English coaches being developed, but he would actually be a great manager for England in the interim, for example. So he manages England during the year. He implements, let's use Eddie Howe again as the example. He implements Eddie Howe's strategies and tactics that he wants to use at the World Cup and the players he wants to use. So it's all preparation for when Eddie Howe takes over. Under him, ideally, you do have some younger English coaches to develop them in that way. But to me, that makes a huge amount of sense. It's like a very logical way of going about it. And I think your primary point is, when you come to the major tournament, you have the best manager possible at the tournament by doing it in this way, because that manager is willing to, say, manage Newcastle and England because he only has to do a 6-week contract, for example.
At the end of the day, the whole goal of this is to try and get elite managers into elite tournaments, because there definitely everyone loves watching the Euros. They love watching the World Cup. When Copa America is on, they'll watch Copa America. And the international tournaments, they do draw eyes. But there's so many times you sit there and it's like, this doesn't feel like elite football. I'm kind of going into a World Cup expecting Champions League, because you've got the best players in the world. They should be playing under the best managers. But then you look at the managers who win these tournaments, more often than not, they don't really do clubs. And if they have done club level, it's not your Man Uniteds, your Barcelonas, your Real Madrids, It's your Steve McLarens and your Big Sams. Like those are managers who go and do international level. So I think it's in the interest of international football and world football to try and get elite managers into those positions. So I think, yeah, this for me would be a way of trying to get that going.
And I do agree with you about like the average quality of an international manager is lower than like say a Premier League manager or a Champions League manager, or at least say knockout stage Champions League manager. Because you look at say Belgium, and they've had Roberto Martinez as a manager for a while, and he's, you know, at club level not done a whole lot. He won a Wigan FA Cup, which is obviously a huge credit to him and a phenomenal achievement, but he kind of didn't do a whole lot at Everton, for example, and some of his other clubs. And after the Belgium job, I'm not sure what kind of job he would really get after that, to your point. But Belgium is a top European nation, so they should have, in theory, a better manager than like that. Funny enough, probably one day Vincent Kompany will be the Belgian manager, and that seems like a good fit.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you. And I think that's a good point to kind of wrap us up on. And I think there's a drop-off in standard with international managers compared to club managers. And I personally would like to see that close. I would like to start seeing Jurgen Klopp versus a Pep Guardiola in a World Cup. I would love to see that. I think everyone would love to see that. So hopefully it's something we can see in the future, whether it's using this short-term contract, which I'm really a massive fan of, or not, doesn't matter. But please, guys, let us know what your thoughts are. Do you think a short-term contract for elite managers is something worth looking at? Or do you think that elite managers should be stuck in Champions League and club football? Let us know in the comments below. Please leave a like. And until next time, this has been Football Unspoken. Cheers.